Okay, everybody's here, so, okay, but I've never trusted that.
Me neither.
Yeah. Okay, I'm calling this meeting of the Rappahannock County Board of Zoning Appeals to order. I'll just call the roll. Bill Keegan. Here. Stafford. Here. I'm Alex Rucker. Ron Macklin. Here. Julie Coates.
Here.
So we're all here. Gabe's all here?
I am too.
Here. And my associate is over there, taking notes. So the first item would be the minutes.
Agenda.
Oh, the agenda, thank you. Yeah. The first item, are there any changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda?
Yeah, under new business, and they're kind of are lengthy, but I think there are 3 items that we need to have discussions on. No action, but anyways, the annual report, and also recusals, and non-conforming lots.
And what are you proposing? What are we going to do with these?
We're going to have it, we have not produced an annual report.
Okay, and then how about the second and third ones?
And then the third one, non-conforming, it has to do with variances on non-conforming lots.
Okay, and this is just for information?
It's for discussion amongst the board.
How about recusals?
What?
How about recusals?
Education.
Education, okay.
As far as what is the proper way to do recusals,
Okay.
so that we're all on the same page, because there is a format that's supposed to be followed.
Okay. And is there any specific event that you're talking about?
It doesn't have to be specific, no. It just has to be that we all need to know
Okay,
when we're going to do that, and what we need to do.
okay.
Could I ask a question? I'd be interested to know what events require a recusal.
Well, if you have a conflict of interest,
But I mean, what is,
That's what we're going to discuss. So we
Specifically-
don't need to discuss it now.
Well,
My
let's
wife
put it
works at the
this way.
Blue Rock, so I had to recuse myself, so.
you did, right?
Right, but I mean, okay, well, there's a thing coming up tonight where, well, maybe we can talk about it then, but I had a business on the same road, and I know the gentleman because he's one of my neighbors. Now, do I recuse from that?
Oh, well, maybe we could mention that one, that applicant. I'm assuming he's talking about yours. Is that right, the Sonic? You're on the
Yeah.
same road? Okay.
I'm talking about recusals in general.
Yeah, and I was just wondering what the specific criteria are. I mean,
That's what we're going
one
to talk
knows
about.
almost, it's a small county, small town, you know everybody, and it's like, well, how well do I have to know somebody before I can't talk?
I think specifically knowing them well, meaning you share a bank account
Okay, well,
or you have a percentage interest in the
so
business.
fiduciary
Yeah, I guess a fiduciary.
relationship of some kind or another.
Or ownership, or you stand to benefit from
I see, okay.
one directly.
Or just might look better.
Or the appearance of.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Okay, well, is there a motion are you making a motion to?
Yes, I am.
I see no issue with at least having a discussion of process, so I'll second the motion.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the next item is the minutes from May 26th. Are they acceptable to?
I move we accept the minutes.
second.
Okay, is there any discussion on that?
Actually, I thought you'd pick it up, but you didn't. You're not Ms. Smart. Sorry,
Okay, well, thank you.
it's Mr.
Okay, then with that minor change, is there anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. The next item is variance 210502 Dodson, Hawkins, and Turn Meyer. Okay, there's an N missing. something missing, okay. Okay, and you're being represented by Mike?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to come forward, or you can speak from there, if we can hear you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Well, I'm gonna open a public comment after.
No, public hearing, public.
Well, this is a public hearing.
Okay, so we're opening the public hearing.
It's a public hearing.
Okay.
It's a public hearing.
Yes, it is. Thank you. I am, of course, Michael Brown. I represent the Foster Sisters in their application for this variance before you this evening. The application materials, I think, fairly describe what is being sought. This is a small 1 acre lot that happens to be situated at the corner of Zachary Taylor Highway and Route 637. In your materials, there is a survey plat that's prepared by surveyor Mr. Shepherd, which shows the impact of the strict application of the front, side, and rear yard, minimum yard requirements on this parcel. Those are shown by the green lines there on that plat. The applicants have sought a very narrowly tailored variance from the front and rear minimum yard requirements, specifically 5 feet, a 5-foot variance from the front yard requirement, and a 5-foot variance from the rear yard requirement, just enough to accommodate a modest 30-foot by 50-foot dwelling. That is a 1,500-foot dwelling. That generally then is shown by the orange or the reddish orange lines there on that survey plat. The reason they have, part of the reasoning or the rationale in seeking the variance from the front and from the rear setbacks, as you see there, is to minimize any impact on adjoining property owners. The property to the southeast of this is an approximately 1+ acre property. It is already improved by a single family residential dwelling. And so they have sought no variance from that side minimum side yard requirement. The property to the southwest of this property is a much larger parcel of land out of the Allnell Farm, Windsor Lodge Farm properties, and is encumbered by an open space conservation easement, rendering it extremely unlikely, if frankly not legally impossible, for there to be any construction of a new dwelling in that corner of that adjoining property to the southwest. The board, of course, in considering the granting of a variance is enjoined by both the Code of Rappahannock County and the Code of Virginia to consider as narrowly tailored a variance grant as possible, and that is the reason we have made this request in this fashion. Obviously, if the board saw fit to modify the variance, which you can do in your meeting this evening, because you did not want to grant the variance off the front to the front yard requirement and would prefer to increase the variance on the rear yard requirement, or vice versa, that's within this board's purview this evening. Our Rappahannock County zoning ordinance empowers this board to grant variances generally upon a finding that by reason of the exceptional narrowness, shallowness, size, or shape of a specific piece of property at the time of the effective date of this chapter, and that's specifically December 1st of 1986, or that the strict application of the terms of this chapter would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the utilization of the property, or where the BZA is simply satisfied that upon the evidence adheres, the granting of the variance will alleviate a clearly demonstrable hardship, that the granting of the variance is authorized. We submit respectfully that because, again, of the size and shape of this property and its unique situation of being in this, I've forgotten what's the opposite of an obtuse angle.
In use.
Whatever it is. I don't think it's intus, Mr. Chairman, but whatever that angle's called, with the way Route 637 and Route 522 come together, that renders this lot a prime candidate is exactly the kind of situation that the board in approving this variance section in our code years ago and the Code of Virginia generally envisioned. Of course, this board must make specific findings under our variance chapter in order to authorize the variance. First, that the strict application of this chapter would produce undue hardship relating to the property. In this case, as we illustrate again on the survey, the minimum front, side, and rear yard requirements end up generating a usable portion of this property that is so narrow it would render it almost unusable for any practical purpose. It is only a 1 acre parcel. It is surrounded by properties that are owned by other property owners. So this is not a piece of property in the agricultural zoning district that could be farmed. For example, I submit to you that it's not clearly practical to expect somebody to be able to really reasonably farm a 1 acre piece of property. If instead these applicants owned a large piece of acreage adjoining it, then this board might consider that, well, it could be used as part of an agricultural operation, but that's not the situation here. The second finding, of course, is that the hardship is not shared generally by other properties in the same zoning district and the same vicinity. Again, generally speaking, the vast majority of parcels in our agricultural zoning district are certainly larger than 1 acre properties. This lot, in fact, was created in 1964. It's been on the books since then, and so it predates any zoning or subdivision ordinance that existed in Rappahannock County. Our first one was 1973. So the other larger parcels don't share this kind of an issue that this smaller lot does. The third finding is that the authorization will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property and that the character of the district itself will not be changed by the granting of the variance. Again, this lot has been on the books since 1964. It's been taxed as a building parcel. Presumably the adjoining property owners, when they acquired their property, they would have been aware of the existence of this lot to their immediate northwest if they troubled themselves to check it. And this variance is not being sought for the purpose of enabling a use on this property that's some kind of obnoxious or offensive activity. It's not looking to put in an abattoir or a hog lot. It's being sought to enable the most innocuous, at least hopefully most of us view that, the most innocuous and least intensive of uses, that is, for one single family residence. So we submit that finding is appropriate. Finally, the last finding is that the condition or situation of the property concerned is not of so general or recurring a nature as to make reasonably practical the formation of a general regulation to be adopted as an amendment to the ordinance. Again, in this situation, that would suggest that, if that were the case, that would suggest that the applicants would be asking the Board of Supervisors to amend the front, side, or rear minimum yard requirements in the entire agricultural zoning district. I submit that would not be an appropriate position for the board to take. So it's not something that could be remedied by an actual text amendment to the zoning ordinance that wouldn't have a broad impact across the entire agricultural zoning district. The Code of Virginia also contains a couple of other considerations in the variance section of the code that actually don't appear in our Rappahannock County Code, and I believe that in fact this board still needs to also consider in this question of granting variances. The other considerations which the Code of Virginia fairly recently amended require is that the granting of the variance does not result in a use that is not otherwise permitted in this zoning district. Single-family dwelling use is a permitted, that's a by right use, as you all know, in the agricultural zoning district. So again, this is not being sought to enable some use that the applicants would normally be able to make for the property. And finally, from the Code of Virginia, there needs to be consideration that the relief or remedy sought by the variance is not available through a special exception process that is authorized in the ordinance. And our Code of Rappahannock County does not contain a special exception provision that would enable the Board of Supervisors to deal with this by special exception. That power is given to you as members of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Finally, there are two additional provisions in the Code of Rappahannock County that you should bear in mind that specifically empowers this board to consider variances from the minimum yard requirements that actually don't appear in the Code of Virginia. And it's interesting in that respect. The first is your section 170-23, which deals with side yard reductions for existing lots. And that applies to lots that were legally recorded prior to the effective date of this chapter, that is, again, December 1, 1986. This lot was recorded in 1964. The last sentence of that Rappahannock Code section says that the BZA may reduce the yard requirements upon determining that doing so would not unreasonably restrict a permitted use on adjacent lots. So that section enjoins you to consider whether the granting of this minor variance to the front and rear yard requirements would somehow unreasonably restrict an adjacent use on a permitted use on an adjacent lot. I suggest that in this case, granting the variance which would permit the construction of one modest single-family dwelling would not have any measurable impact on either of the adjacent lots. And finally, our section 170-75 also deals with non-conforming lots, a subject that Mr. McElroy, I know, wants to address in a broader context soon. In that section, the BZA is empowered to consider granting a variance to the minimum yard requirements only if adjacent lots are under separate ownership on the effective date of this chapter. Again, that's December 1, 1986. Or the lots have been legally approved and recorded prior to 1973. This lot and the adjoining lot to the southeast was in common ownership as of December of 1986, so that does not apply. But this lot was legally created prior to 1973. So again, applying the provisions of 170-75 in the Rappahannock County Code, this board is specifically authorized to consider the granting of this variance from the front and rear minimum yard requirements. So, in summation, we respectfully submit to the board that the applicants have done their very best to narrowly tailor this variance request. They're not coming in with some plan to build a huge dwelling on that property. It's just enough, and that's even assuming that they were to occupy the entire 30-foot by 50-foot area, just enough to accommodate a very modest single-family dwelling. It's a lot that was lawfully created in 1964 and has been taxed by the county as a dwelling parcel. Frankly, in my view, this is a classic situation that the whole principle of variance was designed to deal with, and we would ask the court, I'm in the courtroom, of course. We would ask the board to consider the granting of this variance this evening. The applicants are present, and I'm also happy to answer any questions that the board members may have. Thank you for indulging me with your time.
So we likely would have some questions, right?
Yeah.
You have, okay. I do have just a couple
Yes, sir.
quick questions for you to know. One is, okay, the 522 is wholly owned by the state.
I'm sorry?
522 is owned by the state, it's not a right of way.
Yes.
It's not a- And how about 637?
I believe that section of 637 is probably still a prescriptive right-of-way road. I know for a fact that Zachary Taylor Highway 522
Yes.
the road at the VDOT, the Commonwealth Transportation Commission, condemned all that and approved that, and that's owned in fee simple
Yeah.
by the state. I don't want to misstate. I don't know if any of you all happen to know whether that's the case or not.
I mean, that's not critical on this.
I don't know whether 637, that first branch as it comes off of Zachary Taylor Highway, if that was also part of that condemnation when the highway was approved, or if that's still, even that part of it,
So even
is
that
still a
little
prescriptive
corner.
use road.
Okay.
I'm not certain of that.
And then a very general question. When you keep referring to 1973, that was a previous ordinance, is that correct?
That was yes, sir. That was the.
Was there one in the early 60s? Or
I don't believe there was one in the early, not a subdivision ordinance like we have.
Oh,
like
so
we
there
have
might have
now.
been a zoning, because somehow I have this in my mind that there's 63, 73,
Right.
and then 86. Okay. I'm sure there's some questions.
Yeah, after reading it, I went out and actually measured my house. And my house is a 2-on-2, or the original house that we lived in before having kids, when we added stuff, is 2-on-2. The width is 16 feet, and the length is 40 feet. And we lived very happily in that house. It's 2-on-2, so the statement that that there is prevents construction of even a modest dwelling doesn't strike me as correct unless there's some other restriction. I mean, we live in that size of house. We added a back when we had the 2 kids, but
What's the age of that house?
that was built in 1900.
Yeah, and with due respect, obviously, I respect the fact that your observation is that you all lived happily in that side of the house. That's not the typical modern sort of construction of a single-family dwelling. I think that the board is able to take into consideration in reviewing this variance request. It may be that a 2-story dwelling would result in enough square footage, again, for a modest, what I think we would all consider something that would be a modest single-family dwelling in modern terms, if it was built 2 stories. But requiring the applicants to make their dwelling fit within that green footprint and do what you have described, which is make it a 2-story dwelling, I would submit has a potentially greater impact, greater adverse impact on the adjoining property owners than the granting of the variance, which alleviates the situation of almost requiring somebody to go up 2 stories when, by granting this variance, minor variance, and we're talking about, again, 5 feet, that's less than the width of my 2 arms.
Yeah.
It would potentially enable them to construct a single-story dwelling that would actually lessen that, potentially lessen that impact.
I didn't, because I was actually eager to vote for this variance, and then I just, the undue hardship part.
That's a requirement. It's not, I mean, the rest of it is, everything you say makes perfect sense. And it's all your arguments are very reasonable and very well made. But the problem that I think that we're talking about here is that you don't fulfill the qualifications for having this is not an emergency, this is not something that's undue hardship, and even though, or this, that doesn't forbid you from building a reasonably sized dwelling, just not the proportions that you would have, and that's not the same thing as, some kind of a hardship. I mean, I find it difficult to see 20 feet wide as a hardship. But, I mean, I've lived in houses that were 20 feet wide, but they're 50 feet long, but still, it's very comfortable.
But you're right, I mean, I agree with you in terms of every house on the road is low. So it would certainly fit into the neighborhood if it were lower. But I don't know that it's, I don't know whether that's sufficient to meet an undue hardship.
Okay.
That's to say, I had this for our last variance, and it applies to this variance. This is cover sheets for 10 houses that would fit in that footprint. New houses. It's not uncommon for people to run into this situation, particularly in urban areas. The average width of a brownstone in the city is 18 feet. And people have been, they still live, they're worth, in New York City, they're worth a lot of money. They're 20 feet wide or 18 feet wide. So no, to say that it is impossible to build a modest dwelling is in fact not accurate. I mean,
Well,
I said,
I don't
the plans are there, and you're dealing with a non-conforming lot, which may in fact, in your estimation, or in the terms that you were just talking about as far as today's houses or whatever, require a non-conforming house, but it is still a dwelling that is, there are plans available, and so to say that it's not possible to build on the lot is not accurate.
I never heard you say it's impossible to build.
It's right here.
It says this is it,
The word's right there.
Well,
Impossible. That's the word, right?
I was listening.
Yes.
And if I may be permitted to
Yeah,
respond to that. Again, the use of that word, Mr. Mackler, was in the context, or intended to be in the context of the kind of dwelling that we typically see in this part of the country and in this part of the county. I'll be the first to grant you that the applicants could arrange to build a 3-story townhouse-sized dwelling on that property. My daughter and her fiance are looking at townhouses in Fairfax County right now, and the dimensions of any of those townhouses that they are looking at right now would I think fit within that green, the front side and rear minimum yard requirements, and that's, I think we can, you mentioned the idea of a brownstone, again, in an urban setting. So a dwelling that is scaled and designed in that fashion, I would grant you, could probably fit on that lot, or the kind of dwelling that Ms. Ritter described. The old classic 1900 2/2 farmhouse could fit on that lot. But this board is not constrained or prohibited from considering the overall characteristics of the lot, the characteristics of the adjoining properties. In fact, we're supposed to consider that, and the potential impact on those adjoining property owners. I mean, that's part of what the variance process is all about. So it could be perfectly acceptable for the board to decide that, well, you could build a 2- or 3-story, very narrow, very tall dwelling that would actually fit on that property. But the impact of that, I would just simply urge the board members to consider the overall impact of that, and whether that's in keeping with the character of the agricultural zoning district. Again, the purpose of the variance requirements is to authorize this board to consider minor variations, and specifically in the context of the minimum front, side, and rear yards. Minor variations so that in fact, the overall character of the zoning district can be maintained. I mean, that's part of the purpose of the variance process. So, I grant you, it's possible to say, you know what, you could put up a big 2 or 3 story, very tall, very narrow house and fit it on that lot. But that would in fact do much more harm, and it's contrary to what is envisioned by our variance process. Yes, sir.
Well, we have height limitations of some kind, but some of the most valuable, the most desirable, the most expensive properties in the whole country are in Seattle, Washington, and the preponderance of them have houses that size, and they're 1 story, most of them. I don't think that, threatening the neighborhood with like, a skyscraper is like the right way to approach this, but, I'm just saying, it's possible. It happens all the time.
Well, I've had my say.
I also have another
Okay,
question,
yes.
and that, is it the intent of the present owners of the property to construct a dwelling on the property?
No, sir.
We don't know that. Could I say something?
Yes.
That's fine. Go ahead.
I just, I appreciate your 1900 house, and I appreciate your brownstone, but how wide are your hallways there? Are they gonna be accommodating to a wheelchair? Are you gonna have your door openings? You gotta think about that. A lot of people don't, and sometimes even, it's hard to get wheelchairs through, even when they're made that is wide enough. When you're trying to get through and you've got your arms and your wheels and like I said, I appreciate that, but I know a lot of probably the older homes didn't have the hallways that were wide enough and the doorways were wide enough. And, particularly if you're mobility, you've got scooters and things that have to get around. I know on my house at home, if I try to get a scooter through, it's tough to get through a doorway. And it is handicap accessible. But it's still tough. And a second story, you're eliminating handicapped people right there.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you, since you're not building a house, the person that builds a house could easily do 2 stories, right? There's no restriction. So if we give a variance, it could be 3-story.
I suppose we could restrict it to 1 story. We could, I suppose, restrict it to 1 story if that's important.
And we don't have to accept the setbacks that they propose. I think it is a valid consideration of what the neighboring, what would you want next to you? And I would much rather have a smaller dwelling than something wider and taller to meet a square foot. And I wish, it's unfortunate, I don't think we've opened public comment, but I don't know if there's any neighbors here.
No, we'll
But-
open the public comment.
But I think that is a valid consideration for the environment. Personally, I wouldn't want that next to me. I'd rather have a smaller dwelling, and I think that we have
And you're talking about a lower.
what they've proposed.
I agree with that point, but with the question I just asked, is that what I think you're asking us to do is to approve a footprint on the property.
But that's
So the
all.
property, I was by the property yesterday, there are for sale signs on the property, am I correct? Okay,
Yes, sir.
so the person that buys the property then will decide what they want to build on that property, which would have to be in that footprint, but they could build a 3-story house.
No,
We
because
could-
they can put the variant contingent
We
on.
could,
No.
yes, we can. Yes, we can.
We can restrict the height,
Yes. Yeah, we can.
we can, I've never heard of that.
Well, there was a thing
We
with
can put
the,
restrictions on that would render it valid, I mean, render it acceptable.
this bears on another thing that we're gonna be dealing with. There's a bone of contention on the Blue Rock that a previous owner, maybe 2 owners back, had made a promise to the board that they would or would not do something. And the question is now, is the present owner who was unaware of that bound by that promise?
You know that.
And the thing is, what I'm asking is,
I would ask the
how would we
zoning
bind them
administrator.
to a
Hold on, let's just,
you know, my question is, if they said, oh, well, okay, if you give us the larger footprint, that would be sufficient to have a handicapped, accessible and usable place, and it would also permit us enough space within the footprint to not need a second floor, which we couldn't use anyway because we're handicapped. So if, you know, would we accept the agreement to build 1 floor in a binding way for the red footprint?
or we could, yeah, we could probably do that. We could definitely do
I was gonna say, I would like to get an opinion from the zoning administrator, and then
That
that, are you
is this-
aware of any restrictions that can be placed on a dwelling as far as the design in regards to the height?
It's 170, 136F in your zoning.
that. And that's like 35 feet.
35 feet, yes.
No.
Oh, yes, but that's not, you
Okay,
can't.
go ahead.
Section F, in authorizing the variance, the BZA may impose such conditions regarding the location, character, and other features of the proposed structure or use as it may deem necessary in the public interest, and may require a guarantee or bond to ensure that the conditions imposed are being and will continue to be completed.
And I think a bond is necessary. But, yeah, so rather than saying, okay, well, you have to build a 2-story house, if we determine that a 1-story house meets, and you've represented that to be,
Yeah,
One of the
what about?
What
Would
will-
this be okay with you, the idea being that the wider house, since you couldn't use the second floor anyway, would you be willing to forego a second floor to have a wider
You could
house
have
and
a
be
basement.
accessible
Yeah,
for
you
you?
could have a basement and a main level.
Is that enough? Is that 5 feet each way, is that enough to make an acceptable place for you that wouldn't require a second floor?
Well,
Right, that's
Appropriate
what
hallway.
I'm asking, right? That's
I
I mean, I
what-
design buildings, I think it would be, but
well,
Right, restricted to.
Well,
I think it's-
Yeah, I'm interested in.
Should we open the public?
yeah, I'm going
Yeah,
to.
I think it's
So-
Right.
But just very, very quick on that, is it has been represented that one of the advantages to the neighborhood is that it's not going to be forced to go up 2 stories.
Right, so,
So I think we can discuss that, but that might, I mean, maybe that would be enough to make it palatable to the board. But anyway, is there any other questions right now? Because I'm going to open the
no,
public.
I just wanted to know if, how they felt about that.
Well, we can determine that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing on this application. Is there anybody here who'd like to speak on this application? Any other thoughts? Okay. Yes. You can identify yourself.
Anita Ramos, Hampton District. Just a little comment. Yeah, 1,500 square feet is a modest house by today's standards. Up until, I think, the 1970s, considering a big size house was like 2,000 square feet, and now 2,400 square feet and up is very, very standard in most of the places that I've hung out.
Right.
And I look at a lot of house styles like you do. A shotgun type house can fit there, but a 1-story or even a 2-story on that kind of space that they're proposing is not going to be outlandishly noticeable. And maybe the shotgun longer version could be. Also, it looks like there's still room to put a porch on the back and front, right? I mean, within those green spaces.
Can you,
Oh, you're talking about
have
this.
dinner together and put your mask down?
I'm usually told I talk too loud.
Please speak up.
No, but size-wise, this is a modest size. And so you may be restricting somebody from buying it that might want to go up. And that doesn't mean 3 stories. I think this is well within a reasonable range, size-wise. And another owner might come in and decide that that green shade works out.
Well-
Not even use the variance.
I guess we have to deal with what we're.
Right, that's right. But what I'm saying is that it's 1,500 square feet is not that bad. And putting another floor on it someday, as somebody has more kids or offices or who knows what they have to do in their house, wouldn't be too much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak? Hi. Okay. Thank you. That was very helpful. Okay. Yeah. Okay, is there anybody else? Okay, I'm closing the public hearing. Well, it's some issues here. I would just start out to say that, I mean, a couple of the issues that we've had trouble with on other variances are satisfied here. One is that the property was in existence prior to the ordinance, and so it is something that, was not a self-created hardship. I would regard the situation being between those 2 roads as somewhat challenging under any circumstance. So, I mean, I look at the 5 foot, it's 5 foot on each side.
Just 5 feet from the front yard requirement and 5 feet from the rear yard
Right, but
requirement.
in other words, 5.
Not seeking any variance from the side yard requirement.
Well, I mean, theoretically, if the house was as long as the green, it would still be the same variance, right? In other words, if the variance is just front and rear, or whatever you call that, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I mean, if the house was a little longer, you could still have the same, you'd be asking for no more variance, right?
The maximum would be
The green,
right.
okay.
So in other words, you could make it, it doesn't have to be the orange to make it longer.
Could be longer than the red.
Yes,
Yes,
I see what
that's
you're
what
saying.
Yeah.
And realistically, the orange line does not prevent the house from being initially built into those green lines, because that is within the setbacks.
Well,
So
Correct,
you could build a extension off of both ends of that house as part of the initial construction and still be within.
well, but they're saying that's the footprint, right? I mean, that's the footprint you're asking.
No, setbacks are setbacks.
No, the red is the footprint they're asking for, correct?
The way the application
Right
is
now.
expressed is that the variance is from the front and what we've styled, the front and the rear.
But when you
minimum
say
yard requirement.
30 by 50,
Well, that illustrates a 30 by 50, but we're not, the application is not sought to increase the one side minimum yard requirement from the 100 feet you see there down to whatever that distance is.
Right.
well, so just so I understand.
Right.
If you built into the green, you would keep it within the green?
Well,
In other words,
you certainly could keep it within.
because you've given us a box.
Right. Right.
So,
Here, I think the point is that if we grant you a variance on this side and that side,
Yes.
then that variance is extendable to the entire length of what you have there in the green, which means you could have it 30 feet wide and 100 feet
I'm
wide.
not sure.
You can move it to the left or the right, all the way to the
You
edge
see what
of
I'm
the green
saying?
line,
The
and then
variance doesn't limit you to,
out.
we're not giving you a variance,
It's
excuse
just
me,
a green line.
you're not asking for a variance for to permit the footprint. You're asking for a variance of the property setbacks, which means that the red line could be extended all the way to the end of the green on the right and the left, and still conform with the variance if we gave you
I don't
that.
know.
So you would have a place that's 30 feet wide by 100 feet long, and we'd be actually granting you, if we granted you the variance, is what I'm saying.
Yes, sir, I see your point. And that is the way that the application was worded
Right.
and filed. Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay, so you're asking for,
So what we're actually, the red is your plan for a plan for a house that hasn't been planned yet. We will be granting you the ability, or the future owner, the ability to build a house that's 30 feet wide by 100 feet long, roughly speaking.
I don't.
Because we're granting you a variance on this line and that line, those lines
Oh, okay.
can be extended to the end of the green, at least as long as they stay square. Do you see what I'm saying? Or should I extend it?
Yes, sir, I don't agree with the characterization that we're talking about 100 feet long. I don't think under any measurement to scale, that you could
Let's say
get
it's 80.
Yeah, let's say it's 80,
But yes.
let's just do the quick calculation here. Okay, that's 30 feet. 1, 2, 3, maybe 90.
Okay.
Okay, 85 and 90, this, by granting you a variance, we're granting you this, has nothing to say about this. We're granting you all the way up to here, all the way up to this way and this way. We're not reducing this to this point, which would leave you with the same setbacks from this end that you had before, so we're actually granting you roughly 90 by 30 foot footprint,
We could,
for the way you're asking for.
Yes. Okay. So, that's what you're asking.
That's the way the application
Okay.
is.
Okay, that's fine.
but that is not what we have to approve.
No,
Well, we're
You will
looking
end
at
up to approving that.
setbacks.
they're asking, okay, so now that corrects me, I was thinking otherwise. So you're basically, it's only a 5-foot setback on variance on each side, but you're not suggesting any restrictions on the land.
That is the way the application is
Okay,
filed.
What
And
we,
the board has.
what we would have to do in order to do the orange line is we would have to increase or decrease the setbacks on the front and the back, but at the same time increase the setbacks on both sides in order to keep the
to
house
restrict it.
within that particular
Yeah, but I don't see it still.
square. Because otherwise, if we say that the rear yard setback is reduced by 10 feet or 5 feet, then that applies to the entire length of the lot within the side yard setbacks.
But Ron, the only thing I was getting back at was, are we restricting it to a 1,500 square foot house? And we're not. I mean, we're not. Okay, that was what I just wanted to clarify.
Okay.
Because you could understand what you said to say you're proposing a 1,500 square foot house. Just mean that you were thinking about building a 1,500 square foot house. But really, it could be, according to his calculation, could be 2,700 square foot.
And while I don't believe that the board is empowered to increase under any ordinance, to increase the side minimum yard requirements, the board is empowered in the granting of a variance to condition the grant of the variance in such a way so that if the board wanted to say that the width of the house, that in granting this variance, the width of the house could not exceed X feet. If the board felt that that was appropriate, that would be an appropriate, again, under 170-136F, that would be a permissible condition to impose.
And I think
In the
we can
granting of
certainly
variance.
do that.
You're saying that if we just said that whatever within the variance could be only extended for 50 feet,
we could say it's limited to a certain size.
To a-
Right, the variance one is, you might be able to move it up and down a green spot, but it's 50 feet.
Yeah, that's what you'd be getting at,
Or
is that, yeah, if you felt that a certain size was appropriate.
Well, that's, well, I was just saying, if you thought that size is appropriate, and that's what you're asking for, so that's why I
So we
said.
absolutely can do that. And then I look at it as really sacrificing some of the setbacks on the other side, and you're giving it on the other side.
So, yeah. And you've expressed that the one setback that seemed to be important was on this side, right? Because it might affect the neighbor.
That's one of the reasons why we couched the variance request in the terms that we did, is that it respects that minimum side yard requirement on that side of the
Where
property.
the neighbor is.
Where there is a neighboring.
You actually increase the size.
Right.
So-
And
Trying to tailor this variance.
Effectively, that's the only neighbor that really would be impacted.
That, in my view, that's.
Yeah, because the
that's
other
accurate.
is a larger parcel on this side.
The property to the southwest is a little corner of a much larger, I'm gonna say 28-acre parcel that I'm not sure where, again, because of the conservation easement, anything can be built in that little corner of that property.
I mean, I see it as allowing a house that is commensurate with what could be built. If we force them to constrict, they could definitely build a longer house with more square footage. So I think if they're staying off of this side a little bit, maybe, he could provide a better estimate of maybe 10 feet.
It's about a third of what the width is there, so it's about 10 feet.
I was thinking 9.5.
Yeah, something like that.
But anyway, so you'd be coming back, alleviating that a little bit. But then we could allow it to extend further on the other side. And then we could potentially say it has to be 1 story. But maybe we give them 1,800 square feet.
No, that's not a problem.
Yeah.
I think if what's best for the neighborhood, if they're, like, the neighbors are happy and they're happy with the neighbors being happy in that way.
So that might be, could try to do it that way. Just, does that seem, we wouldn't be pushing it all the way on this side because that was.
For that matter, they can move the whole red square that way and neighbors on the southeast would, could ostensibly be thrilled.
But again, we still, I think that we can condition it and we can determine where it is. And I think you may, he's got some ideas. It may not be the be all and end all, but I think to me it's perfectly acceptable. And I think we could sacrifice whatever this thing is of restricting it to 30 by 50 to just restrict it to maybe 30 by 60 or 70 and just have a known quantity. And that would be a much more typical house. And we could restrict it to the 1 level. You can have a basement. You can finish the basement. I don't know what more you need, really.
I believe that would certainly be acceptable to the applicants. It's not.
That's more than you asked for.
It's not our position to negotiate, so.
Definitely allow the garage.
No,
Yeah.
you could have.
Even though I don't think that that it's impossible to construct a reasonably sized residential modest dwelling is a valid hardship. I think they need to have an acceptable handicap facility is probably more of a demonstrable hardship, and I'd be willing to look at it from that point of view. If the whole thing was consistent with that in 1 floor, which would make it a lot more room.
So,
Want to make a motion?
If you were going to draw with your proposal, are you extending
should
the
I
red
stand?
lines?
Stand up. May I stand up?
Sure.
Let me get my point of view. Okay, I'm just suggesting that you would have it, and my measurement is not quite as exact, but here, but just that this could probably extend up something like that.
Yeah,
So that would be an added, like 20 or 30 feet on that end.
well, yeah,
But we just give it that dimension.
if we don't.
Instead of 50, it would be 70 or 80.
Give it to 70 feet.
But if by right,
I
then
mean,
you
they got
go
50 there.
all the way. they
Well,
can-
there's some give and take and stuff.
But that's one story, reduced down to like 70, 30 by 70 maximum, or
So 30 by 70, okay, so say 30 by 70,
one floor.
one level with, I mean, and we're
But
not
the thing is
restricting
that-
basement, one above ground level, I guess you'd say.
It would be important to me to know that this wasn't something that was just a promise, it was somehow, if the property's transferred, the requirement to transfer the
It
property.
does, it would.
Unlike a special permit where the permit can be granted to a specific applicant,
Right.
a variance is something that is property specific, it runs with the property. Yes.
Make sure that that's understood.
And I shouldn't speak too broadly on this particular. There is a provision now in the Code of Virginia that does permit an applicant that has a disability, as we think of it under the ADA now, to come in and seek a variance to accommodate a specific, for the purpose of accommodating some kind of disability, a provision related to their disability. That actually doesn't appear in our Rappahannock County Code yet.
We kind of inadvertently acted under that auspices in some vague way here, I think, haven't we? I say we have, I mean.
We've strayed into that discussion, but that's not.
Thing that is.
Look, yeah, in that case, it would be a hardship.
Right, and which is, very valid.
But I guess you could also extrapolate a little bit and say that modern building. Okay, so, and you're gonna get an opportunity to discuss here, unless you have a motion, but I'm hearing him about to come up with a motion.
We'll see what the motion is.
Okay, so, I'm hearing potentially a motion to allow a 5-foot setback on the front and rear. Well, I keep calling front and rear, is that correct?
Technically, that is correct, because the.
Because I thought we were calling it
It's going to
front.
make them enter from the right.
Yeah.
They can't enter
Front
from
on 6
522, so let's call that the front.
Because of where this lot is situated, we actually have 2 front yards
Okay,
and one side yard, one side yard and one rear yard.
okay.
So I think it would be accurate to refer to it as I don't think it's the board's intention to permit a variance from the front yard that fronts on Route 522. So I think it should specifically refer to a variance from the front yard fronting on Route 637.
Right.
And then, and by doing it, then the rear yard is, by definition, the yard opposite.
Okay,
So
so
that's where DDOT recommended,
or be on
basically, not
637.
recommended,
They
said
won't
that
let
the
you.
driveway must enter from 630,
Yeah.
37.
They won't permit.
They won't permit it on
Right.
522,
If
so
this
that
board,
tends to make that the front.
I mean, if this board saw fit to impose that as an additional condition, that the entrance, the driveway entrance must be Route 637, that would be consistent with.
Yeah,
The highway department.
Yeah, but we got.
Right.
Yeah, that DDOT already has.
I don't think they're gonna allow any entrance on the
They
drive.
suggest,
There's a document in here that says
Right.
precisely that they won't.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
that's me.
okay,
but this,
okay. So I'm hearing potentially is allowing a 5-foot on each side with a 70-foot long house.
But 70-foot long variance,
That's
well, length, what, maximum length?
70 feet.
And from the front, from the 522, 637, whatever it is, and so that the neighbor gets the best benefit of having space.
Okay, so that it be as far as is allowed towards 522.
Right, a rectangle is as far as well, it's 5 feet.
Meeting the setback at 522.
Right, meaning the
What
same, right.
he's trying to say that we're moving it as far as it can be moved. So I guess that would be to that corner.
See,
Let me just, if I understand, I'm putting words in his mouth. So we'd be extending it to here.
Right.
Towards 522.
Mike,
I can't picture that being a problem. That would be a problem.
No.
Yeah, I mean, I picture it being pretty flat.
Mike, real quick. They're deciding. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So if it went to this point,
Right.
or something like that, if it had,
We were just talking about it, we don't think, I
Okay.
think if that's the board's pleasure, I don't think that.
okay, so
would be wrong.
just, well, you can verbalize that.
Okay, let's see if we can verbalize this. Okay, we are willing to permit the variance for the 5-foot setback front and aft as long as
Is apt, then.
as long as it meets the setback,
Well,
the maximum extent would be the setback to Route 522.
Well, 70 foot long. Yeah.
Right, 70 feet long, from the setback point of, the setback of 522. So
Well, we're not considering giving them a variance on 522, so.
No, we're just saying that the
So I
closest.
think we
that
can authorize a 70 foot long house.
Right, but I mean, if they put a 50-foot long setback, a 50-foot long house, it would go right where it is, but if it goes to 70 feet, we want it to go towards 522,
Yeah.
not towards the
Okay,
neighbors.
yeah. Okay. And we're wanting them to enter on 637.
Right, well, that's VDOT, of course.
And then we're also wanting to limit it to 1 story.
One story,
Above ground story.
1 story and 30 by 70 feet, abutting the
And push
setback for 522.
towards 522 to the maximum.
We can just abut the 522 setback.
Okay. Then, Julie, you think you got that?
I'm working
I want
on
to read that back to it.
I hate to ask, is there anything else?
I will attempt to summarize that, so we can go through the findings. So the proposal that approving the variance, for the front and rear setback requirements, for a footprint of the home no greater than 30 foot by 70 foot, and with the maximum, setback being from 522. The entry must be on
When you
637.
say maximum, you mean.
Abutting the setback from 522.
Abutting, I mean,
If
they can do
it moves
nothing
up to that lower corner on the left, we would be abutting the 522
But
setback.
we're not giving them a variance on that side.
No, but,
So I think that takes care of it, actually.
right,
Okay. So do we need to say anything about 522?
No, probably not.
I think it's covered by the 30 foot by 70 foot.
Yeah, yeah, and then the other thing would be, that they're entering off of, is that
637.
Jericho Road.
637, and then 1 story.
And one above ground story.
Above
Basement, 11.
Okay, do we have a second before we go to the findings? Is that curiosity?
Ron, you want a second? No.
Absolutely
Okay.
not.
Who wants the second?
Yes, 70 feet seems really,
There is, if you can find anything in the code that allows us to control the height of to control the height of the structure from the approved,
He just quoted that section, or you quoted it.
170-136 paragraph F.
170, 136.
that says, well, that's the one we read before, but I don't believe, I've never,
We can apply conditions as is fit.
And
That's a
I'm-
condition.
And I would say it's right in line with 170-52 General Standards A. I mean, it specifically talks about the height of buildings and structures.
Yeah.
So if our condition is taking into account the height, then I believe that I can make the finding.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
I do believe, Mr. Maclo, when paragraph F says, may impose such conditions regarding the location, character, and other features of the proposed structure, I think height is the feature. I don't think there's any question.
Mr. Macla,
Very vague.
are you tending to want to approve the permit if that condition is placed on it?
Which condition?
For the one-story, no?
But I think we are in agree, well, I heard that as part of the motion, so I think we should,
What was part of the motion?
the one story.
One story was part of the motion.
Yes, it is absolutely correct. I'll second the motion and go through the general standards.
Okay, and so this will be part of the discussion as we'll just go through and make sure that we can, enough of us can make the findings. Okay,
Each of you should have a copy of them, so I'm not going to read every single line in the interest of brevity. But A, the proposed use shall be that it does not adversely affect the use or development of neighboring properties and shall be in accordance with the applicable zoning district regulations, the location, size, and height of building structures, walls, and fences, and the nature and extent of screening, buffering, and landscaping shall be such that the use will not hinder or discourage the appropriate development or use of the adjacent nearby land or buildings to impair the value thereof. I can make that finding. I think that's the entire point of what we're approving versus letting them build.
I can probably approve, where's the hardship finding?
well, we're
Yeah,
not
skip
there.
over.
This is
We're
general
not
standard
there.
A.
We're not
Standard
there.
A, okay.
I don't know, this is not necessarily for a variance.
These are the general standards. Fine.
Okay.
General standard, okay.
Well, I mean, doesn't sound like you're gonna make the hardship one. So,
Okay, yeah, I can, with the general standards, yeah, I can go with that one.
I can make that
I
one.
can make that.
Okay, okay.
B, the proposed use shall be that pedestrian vehicular traffic generated will not be hazardous or conflict with the existing and anticipated traffic in the neighborhood and on the streets serving the site. I can make that finding. The home that, with the limitations we're proposing, is functionally, the use is no different than what it would be otherwise.
Yeah, I can make that one. I think everybody.
Accept, make that fun?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, we're all in agreement.
C, adequate utility, drainage, parking, loading, and other necessary facilities to serve the proposed use shall be provided. I can make that finding.
Yes.
Yes.
D, signs shall be regulated by the provisions of Article 12, except as may be qualified in the subsections of that particular use. I think it's not applicable. The issue there. E, future impact of proposed use shall be considered and addressed in establishing a time limit of the permit. Not applicable. The proposed use shall be such that the air quality, surface, and groundwater quality are not degraded or depleted. It's no different than what I can make the finding. It's no different than what they already have by right.
Yeah, I do think you're reading actually about special exception, special permit.
I was gonna say, this is,
That's
what I
it
think.
specifically states under variances, the four
Yeah,
specifics
Oh, yes.
for findings.
let's go,
Right.
let's
And
go.
that's what we're dealing with. So these
Yes,
are,
you are correct. I don't have that in front of me.
I was,
okay, right here. Yes. Right, A, B, C, and D.
Yes, thank you. Okay, A, the strict application of this chapter would produce undue hardship relating to the property.
I mean,
No.
I can make that finding.
Ron, I can make that fun.
No, I can make that finding.
You can make- So, just for everybody's information, since he cannot make that one finding, he's not going to be able to vote yes.
Is what? So
Ron will not be able to vote yes, because you could not make that one comment.
I believe that's logically
Yeah.
correct.
So,
Yes.
so you don't need to torment yourself about these other ones.
B, the hardship is not shared generally by other properties in the same zoning district in the same vicinity. I can make that finding.
I can make that one.
And I can make that finding.
The authorization of the variance will not be a substantial detriment to an adjacent property, and that the character of the district will not be changed by the granting of the variance. I can make that finding.
Yes, I can.
I can make that finding, okay?
And the condition or situation of the property concerned is not of so general or recurring a nature as to make reasonably practicable the formulation of a general regulation to be adopted as amendment to the ordinance.
Yes.
I can make a finding.
Yes.
Okay. So, that being said, I guess we'll have a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
No,
Okay, so,
We very much appreciate the board's time. Thank
okay,
you, Mike.
thank you very much.
We appreciate your consideration.
Okay, have a good day. Okay, the next one, hopefully this one everybody's on.
That's a little bit.
You need one?
We just didn't want to make a lot of
Oh,
noise.
no, we'll take a short break.
Okay.
Sure, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item of business is special use permit 210301, Burgers Sonnet LLC Custom Sawmill. Ron has brought up an issue that, would you go ahead?
basically in our rules, under applications to the BZA, general rules, applications for special use permits, variances, and appeals shall be made on forms approved by, and it goes through all of that. That's 6.1. When you get to 6.2, it says, if an applicant or appellant is a legal entity, corporation, limited liability company, partnership, trust, etc., it must be represented by counsel before the board. Any filing by or on behalf of a legal entity shall not be accepted and shall be rejected if not filed in a timely manner by counsel duly admitted to practice law in Virginia. And basically, particularly the last form, or the last letter that you sent to Michelle following the Planning Commission, which was quoting Virginia specific parts of the law, puts it in. If it was, my understanding is if it's just general information that you're providing, then you don't need an attorney. But as soon as you start quoting specific points of the law, then you're required to have an attorney. And so, and those are our rules. So, we gotta operate under our rules. So it's not, and I believe your husband is an attorney, isn't he?
Mhm.
So if he was here,
Is he around?
No.
Oh.
You mentioned something about a time restriction.
but
Something that you read there indicated a time restriction. A
Time.
time-
the filing, I mean, basically what you wrote after the Planning Commission meeting to Michelle, that as you go down through the letter that you wrote,
Mhm.
you were
The supplemental?
referencing specific points in the state code
Uh-huh.
to back up. That's where it kind of goes over the line. So we're obligated at that point, and we've run into this before and required the same thing. So at this point in time, we really can't, you need to be represented by a legal counsel in order to bring it forward.
So could I get some guidance then? Is this something that I could ask you to put back on your
Well,
agenda?
I think we could.
Oh, we can
table.
table it.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
it's just that we, under our rules, we're not able to take action, or we're not, basically, the way it reads is we're not able to accept that information that you wrote to back up your request because it doesn't meet the requirements.
Got it. And I'm sorry, can I get that site again?
well, it's our rules and procedures.
Okay, so we have, the Board of Zoning Appeals has a rules of procedure.
Right. But then this particular part of the procedure is based on Virginia Code 16.1-88.03.
So your rules of procedure are based on the Code of Virginia, of
Right,
that site? Okay,
right.
got it.
So we're not trying to give you a hard time. It's just-
No, no, no.
It's,
That's what we're all here for, is rules. Okay, all right, well, thank you very much.
So,
So I'll make a motion.
so you'd be able to come back next month. I know, I'm assuming you're here to speak. You'd be able to come back next month, probably. I'm not gonna be here next month, but you don't need me.
Well, as long as nobody has to recuse themselves.
Can we open public comment and leave it open for this table? Just to hear
I mean, we-
comments on it?
I mean, we've,
Well, I mean, it's kind of unfair to the public, to anybody who's here to make public comment and not be able to hear, because there may be changes.
well, she's heard the planning commission. I don't know.
Yeah, but there could be a change in between now and then, as far as, I mean, that happens.
As far as the application.
So it would not be beneficial for you to make comments now that you might want to, make additional comments.
I think the gist is you'd be able to come next month.
I would, but I don't think it's appropriate to comment, for me to comment, because it's not public comment.
Well, no, but it's just, I mean, you're probably here to speak on this application. So,
I would like to listen to it, yes.
okay. Okay, well, based on that, the appropriate thing would be to table it till next month, unless there's.
I suppose.
Now, can we have to be careful on advertising or whatever, and that we may actually have to.
Well, we've actually started to discuss it, so I could say we've opened the public hearing. And then we can table it, or we can continue it.
We can, yes, then we need to
Continue it.
Just to summarize for Ms. Summers, because this application came in as LLC, and because our rules of procedure state that they need to be represented by attorney, we're considering tabling this. And perhaps just for future, since this is the second time it's occurred, perhaps should be on the checklist that if someone's applying as an LLC, they need to ensure they come.
Or a corporation.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's indeed an idea.
Because we don't want to waste the applicant's time or the neighbor's time.
Yeah.
It's certainly not the intent.
Totally agree.
Okay, do we have a motion to continue this hearing on this special use permit until the next meeting?
I so moved.
I'll second it.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And when would that date be?
That's the fourth Wednesday in July. And I think that's, 26th, probably the 28th. But you might want to check.
It is July 28th.
You may want to double check that.
Yeah. Okay. The next items are, I guess we'll go to Ron's questions. I would say the annual report I have not properly thought about, so I'm consider myself reminded.
Okay, on annual reports, because I've put an S in that.
And we did last year.
No, yes, we did, it's my piece of paper.
It's for 2020.
Yes, yes.
2020.
Under 170, I mean, we have our report that we are required to generate. But under 170-126 of the local code, powers and duties of the zoning administrator, and I don't know if you're even aware of this, is that making periodic reports to the board at intervals at not greater than 12 months, summarizing for the period since the last report, all applications approved and all complaints of violations and actions taken thereon. A copy of such report shall be filed with the commission and the BZA.
So that's what you're saying.
That's another annual report that comes from the zoning administrator, but to my knowledge, I've never seen one of those. I don't know if the zoning administrator is even.
I make a report to the board of supervisors every month.
No, but not covering these items. You make a report that covers meeting to attend and actions by boards, but it does not cover complaints of violations and actions taken thereof.
We haven't had.
And that's, I mean, it's in the code. That report is supposed to be generated at least on an annual basis. So, and my question is, should we, wondering where the report is?
Have any of those events occurred?
What?
Have complaints been filed?
I mean,
We
periodically.
don't know because there's no report.
Oh, I understand that, but if there had been none filed, there would be no report to make except to say that there were none filed, right?
Okay,
Yes.
let's just say that you've made us aware of this, you've made Michelle aware of it. And we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, if nobody else on the board is concerned,
Okay.
that's fine, but it is in the code.
Okay.
And when.
That's
one of the minutes.
That's good to mention.
What was the code say?
What?
What's the code section?
170-126, powers and duties of the zoning administrator, and it's B.
Okay.
170-126B.
Okay, so the next item is recusals, and
Yes, and this is not meant as criticism because of lack of education. But at the last meeting, although I was not here, I did watch the tape. And having been somebody that served on boards and I've had to recuse myself at various times, there is a process that we have to understand when it comes to recusal.
now you're talking about Bill
Last month of my recusal?
recused himself.
That is why we need to talk about it.
Okay,
Yes,
well,
because
yeah,
that was not done correctly.
Okay, talk.
Okay, when you recuse yourself, that is, you are removing yourself from the debate. And it is a literal action. You can't just sit at the table and say, I recuse myself. You physically have to get up and leave the table.
Oh, okay.
And go to, some people will, depending upon the situation, if it's like a closed meeting or something like that, normally you leave the room.
I see.
In a situation like this, you can go and sit in the back row
Right.
until that's over, and then you return to the table.
Oh, good, okay.
But also, because it can be, like in our next meeting, it could be critical, is that chairman's not going to be here, so there's only going to be 4 members. Now, if one of the members that's going to be here is going to need to recuse themselves on an issue, that leaves only 3 people to vote.
Right.
I don't think you're not involved in this business.
What?
I'm assuming you're talking to Son.
The Blue Rock?
No, I'm talking hypothetical here, I'm not talking about the next meeting.
I don't know,
So your neighbors, you're kind of in that.
No, I mean, I sold a motorcycle once, years ago, that's my only.
Was it a good motorcycle?
What? I never paid for it. No shit.
You're not following what I'm saying. Pay attention, people.
No, we're listening.
Okay.
What you're saying.
It's important to, if you know you're going to recuse yourself, to let the chairman know in advance.
Okay.
And so the board members can know, because it could be critical in that if one person doesn't attend and then one person recuses, then at least 3 people, and then any
Well, I don't
vote,
think there's
wait a minute,
Go ahead.
Hold on.
let me finish.
Okay.
Then any vote that is taken has to be unanimous, or it's going to fail.
Well, no, because it only has to be 3, a quorum.
I think he's speaking if you're absent.
No, there will be 3.
There are items that require 3 votes to be.
And there will be 4 people.
But
If one
he's saying if I
person
recuse
recuses
myself, which I don't
themselves,
plan
then
to
you
do.
only have 3.
Well,
And it's quite honestly, it's unfair to the applicant at times, in that the applicant needs to know this, and that it puts them in a position where they could, easily lose their case because of
they could request a
and then
they could request it be continued to the following meeting.
if you informed them that that was going to be the
I
case.
did
Can
mention.
I inform you now, I'm not going to recuse myself. I just, he said, I asked
is
a
too
question.
personal.
He's not recusing
I'm
himself
not
on the next
recusing
meeting.
myself, Alex made
You're
it clear that I
taking this
didn't
too
need to.
personal.
My
It's a,
My life extends
I asked,
30 days
He
from
said, no, and I said, that, okay.
this is,
I'm going to let the minutes reflect that we discussed process with respect to recusal, that any kind of recusal will respectfully request advance notice of recusals,
And we
and
can
also,
notify the
Okay.
applicants.
and
The
also,
only thing right now that I would recuse myself of that I can foresee is regarding.
No, I think we're talking-
this is not about you, this is about just the whole subject, the
I
concept.
understand that.
I thought it was about
and the other key point being that if you are recusing yourself, you need to physically and orally.
Bill, the lesson here.
Huh?
The other key point about recusals being if you are recusing yourself from a hearing, you need to remove yourself physically as well as orally from that conversation.
From here, you can go.
But my understanding of this is you are not participating in the discussion. Like if you're recused, so you wouldn't sit up here in front and say, oh yeah, that's a great guy and blah, blah, blah.
No, you just,
And
I
then,
have
I
to shut
recuse
up. I
myself.
thought I'd just shut up and
Well,
that's sufficient.
That would probably be okay. Ron says you need to sit in a different location.
Well, that's not a
fine.
problem.
That's
I'm not
fine.
being critical,
That's fine.
but at your last meeting, that that's not what happened.
Well, the last meeting is over, we're not gonna get to play it again, so maybe we should think about the future.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was talking about.
That's why we're, just so we're all on the same page.
Again, the various.
Yeah, we're on the same page,
Very
we're
good.
well advised, thank you for your,
Yes.
I appreciate it, we'll follow those
Okay.
guidelines in the future.
Thank you very much. Now, the next one is non-conforming lots.
Non-conforming lots. Okay, in the training material, which is based, the state certification for BZA, there are 5 key principles to know about variances. And the second one is, variances should be sparingly granted. A high number of variance applications on a recurring issue indicates problems with the zoning ordinance, and the solution is to amend the regulations and not to keep considering variance applications. Our last 4 variance applications have had to do with non-conforming lots.
And your point is?
And the point is that that it's become a recurring issue, which is creating a problem for us. How long did we talk about it tonight? And in the previous meeting.
And your
it is
suggestion
creating
is
a
that-
problem in that in the county, there are numerous small, non-conforming lots that people wish to build houses on, and we end up with setback problems. But there has to be it shouldn't be something that's continuously coming to this board.
Well, it has to come before this board.
What do you suggest they
Read
do?
what it says here.
You're misinterpreting that.
What do you suggest they do? What's your, let's have an action.
That is where.
Hold on, may I speak?
Okay, you can see.
Okay. That would cover items like what is it, the Twin Falls?
No, we're gonna get them, the cabin branch.
Okay, but it's where there's multiple lots in one area, like a subdivision. There was, the subdivision or something where it's a group of lots and there's reoccurring and they're all of that nature. That's what that's designed for. It's not designed for one lot.
That is not what it says. It says on a recurring issue.
Recurring issue would have to be in one area.
No, it doesn't say that.
a recurring issue is a non-conforming lot. You're not gonna zone that out.
You're not going to zone it out, but you can come up with a regulation
No,
that deals
you
with.
cannot.
We can't, no.
They
No.
cannot, because these are exceptions. This is like one lot in the middle of hundreds of acres, and it happens to be not conforming. You do not write a zoning ordinance to fix one lot in one location. And the other one was the same thing. It's the last one. Was
There are certain issues.
Well,
with
I don't know
our-
about the Browntown one, that could fit what you're talking about.
Yeah, that
The
one.
Browntown Road, that could fit what you're talking about, but not the one today.
There are certain issues that must recur because these are the things we do. And if we didn't expect them to recur, then we wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's recurring because if you change the ordinance to say if you're in the Twin Falls subdivision, or whatever you call that on Browntown Road, we're gonna change the setback from 50 feet to 20 feet or something like that. That's how you could deal with it, and yes, that's appropriate.
You could also.
Or you could say nobody can build a house.
Yeah, that's what you could say.
Yeah, but I mean, you're not gonna
In
do
fact,
that.
that would be really helpful because
That's,
that particular land is really, well, yeah.
that's why it needs to be looked at, and it could be, because, and these tend to be in, all of them tend to be in lots that are under 2 acres,
That's
for
true.
some reason.
Well,
And so,
because those are small.
for the county to look at developing some sort of a, exception that would be, so it would not have to come to the, as a variance to this board, in that in lots, non-conforming lots, in that a certain house number of square feet is allotted for a building, without having to worry about the setback.
That's impossible.
No, you have to have a setback.
I don't know, we just
Well, because you have a zoning, okay, so basically what you're suggesting, you have a zoning class area, like agricultural. And then you say, oh, but if you have a non-conforming lot, you don't have to follow the setback, it's something else.
No, not
Why
necessarily.
can't we just make that determination? That's what we're here
Right.
for.
Okay.
That's our whole purpose
Okay.
in variances.
And
Now-
a lot of this non-conforming things happened before there was anything
That's
to
the-
conform to, so
That's
it's
the whole
hard
way
to
there.
hold them to something that they.
That's how a non-conforming lot is created. The ordinance comes in and puts restrictions on it that it cannot meet.
Right, and so that, and
And so that's what's.
none of these lots were formed to be non-conforming after the zoning.
Well, we did have the one which was a questionable one, but
Right.
that's the only one I can really remember. All the other ones, like even Chester had, I mean, these things existed when the ordinance was created. So if somebody had one parcel, they couldn't build on it under the agricultural or conservation setbacks because the lot's too narrow. So what do? Say, well, anybody with a lot that's too narrow, you can build on it and no variance? What would that
Or
do?
Well,
you could just say you can't build on it.
You
I mean, that would be the only,
Well,
if you don't have a variance.
I mean, there must be
We
certain
develop
criteria
criteria.
which if one satisfies them, one can't build.
So you develop just a
It's just-
general variance that somebody.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I'm saying, and that would solve the whole problem.
That would be
If it-
so easy.
A general variance on that particular situation, so it goes to the zoning administrator, and she goes, okay, it's a non-conforming lot, you've got so many square feet, and we can fit it in here, and if they accept that, that's fine, if not, then they can come to the Board of Zoning Appeals, and.
Now, there are some areas where the zoning administrator is permitted, is that not true, to grant a certain level of variance? Like, they're allowed to
Yeah.
understate, I mean,
Yeah,
so
this
you
would-
could
this
say,
would be
this one,
one of those cases.
this one today probably would have been one that in some areas would administratively be granted because it's minimal.
No, I don't think so.
And, I mean, not here, because I don't think that's not here, but in some areas, the zoning administrator is empowered to grant, certain, up to a certain level. It was a percent,
Discretion.
like 5%.
This is the, this is,
invasion.
what the state recommends, but I guess it's Rappahannock.
Okay, actually, I've got an associate here. You want to call for the adjournment?
Yes.
How do you do that? Say, okay, say, do I
Yes,
hear a
who's gonna-
motion to adjourn?
May I have a motion to adjourn? Say,
Say
may I have a motion to adjourn?
They have a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
I second.
I second to adjourn.
And say all in favor.
All in favor.
Opposed? Thank you.
This is also Rappahannock.
That was very graceful.
That was really well done.
I think she's ready to leave. Is that?
No,